2023 wasn't a good year for the Carolina Panthers, but I'm trying to make 2024 a better one for myself. Get started on your resolutions with Factor so you're ready for the new year. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, prep work, and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, including keto options, calorie smart, vegan plus veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. Skip that overpriced takeout trap. Factor is cheaper and way more delicious than takeout. Get chef-crafted, restaurant-quality meals delivered right to your door, and they're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, which means more time for you. Head to factormeals.com/C350 and use the promo code C350 to get 50% off. That's code C350 at factormeals.com/C350 to get 50% off.
A C3 exclusive.
All right. Welcome to the C3 Panthers podcast. It's a special Combine edition where we've got a friend, a longtime friend of the podcast, David Harrison, who is what I would like to say now, an insider. David Harrison is the host of Locked On Bucs podcast, as well as writer for Bucs Nation. David Harrison, fantastic to be hanging out with you again, man. You bring so much great insight. I cannot tell you how excited I was when you messaged me. I felt like an insider, David. I felt like an insider when you said, "Hey, anybody you want to talk to?" Thanks for coming on the C3 Panthers podcast, man.
I appreciate you having me on. I mean, yeah, I was reaching out to you guys and some other folks that I've talked to in the past. I mean, nobody gets to where they're at without the help of other people and the participation of others. You guys are part of that for me. And I mean, I'm nowhere near hopefully where I'm going to end up, but I'm enjoying where I'm at now. So yeah, of course, reach out to guys that I think do good work and are knowledgeable and don't necessarily what do we call it? Kind of hype up things a little too much more than they should, but are at the same time passionate and knowledgeable about what they're talking about. So
heck yeah.
I was more than happy to do it.
Don't worry, we'll hot take you enough. You will. No, but it's so cool to have this, is that we have just been, or at least I know on my side of things, that just a group of friends that have talked football. And yes, we have taken it seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. And you have done such great work. It has been awesome to watch. I've watched it. First of all, I've watched you go, and I haven't seen it from the beginning to the end. And like you said, you're going to go so many more places. But boy, have you taken your work seriously, and it is shown at every individual point. Draft guru here, David Harrison, but also I've got Cody Lashney here, draft guru himself, on that trajectory. Don't worry, he's going to follow that trajectory himself. Cody, good to be hanging out with you again.
My man, you know I love talking football and I love talking all things draft. Thank you to David for joining us tonight. I'm excited, man. It takes a certain kind of person to get excited about this stuff, seeing prospects do bench pressing and running 40 times and answering questions about the NFL. I love it, and I'm glad that David loves it too, and that we can pick his brain tonight.
Hey, Dave, tell where our listeners can follow you, because I'm going to tell you guys this. If you're not following him, you're missing out, because this is a level perspective. Clearly, my man is interested in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I tell you, he doesn't get too high, too low on anything, and he's dealt with us and put up with me for several years. Dave, tell them how they can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, so I'm at DH82_Bucs on Twitter. And like you said, I mean, I just love football. I'm a football guy first and a Buccaneers guy, I guess, second. I mean, I cover the Buccaneers for the site, so that's kind of what I do. But my history, I mean, you guys have been part of my history. I've covered the entire NFL. I've covered the AFC North. I've covered the Cleveland Browns. I've covered all kinds of different. I just love football, man. It's great.
Look,
and yeah, draft season is my Christmas. So
He's turning into the media member right there because he loves football first. We love the Panthers, and that's what he knew. He sent me a message. He said, "Look, I'm here at the Combine." And I was like, "Oh my God, my man's at the Combine." Tell me this is first of all, before we get into all the things we want to know about guys we're interested in, what was it like? Was this your first time at the Combine? What was it like?
Yeah, it was my first time in the Combine, and it was interesting to watch because I've been able to attend some pro days in the past, but the Combine just really is. It's like a pro day on all kinds of just steroids and just nonstop work. I think we put in probably 15, 16 hours of work each day. James and I go in there. I've got like 2 or 3 recorders and cell phone files sitting on my computer and on my desk still waiting to be transferred. Just like, hours
how do
and
you
hours
go through it? How do you go through all that material? That must be ominous in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it's hard, but it's fun. I mean, like you said, I mean, just the love of the game and love of football, just hearing these kids talk about what they're trying to do and hearing some of the coaches and the GMs. Ron Rivera, I mean, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Coach Rivera, even though he's a Panthers coach, obviously. You know, he's a guy that I look up to. And so to get to the chance to, I was going to go watch him and watch him talk no matter what. Anyway, so getting to get some input from you guys on what you want to hear from your coach was definitely something I wanted to do. And just all the personalities, even some of the behind the scenes stuff, meeting guys like Steve Atwater, seeing John Lynch, you know, kind of out and about on the town, just relaxed and getting to kind of say just a couple of words, nothing too impactful, but just kind of seeing all the busyness behind the scenes and everything was eye opening and knowledgeable. And then just meeting a lot of people. I've got some friends who work for like NFL Network, NFL.com, other publications. And so getting to meet them in the flesh, something that Jake Arthur and I kind of talked about as a Colts writer, is that you get to meet a lot of people.
Yeah, we've had him on the show.
Yeah, exactly. And he's someone I know that I got to meet for the first time. So that was really just a lot of fun. Just putting those personal experiences to some of these online interactions was a blast.
David, you mentioned Ron Rivera, and Ron Rivera at this point in time is a little bit controversial. Fans either love him or hate him. Frankly, it feels like most are kind of not too favorable with Ron Rivera now. But you mentioned that you were at his interview and you got to hear him speak a little bit. Did you have a specific takeaway that you took from Ron Rivera during his time at the podium? And if so, what was it?
And particularly in comparison maybe to other coaches, you know, because you don't get to see everybody each year. So you got to see Ron Rivera. Maybe you got to see some other coaches. So what's the takeaway? And also maybe slightly the feel in comparison to other coaches.
Yeah. So Ron himself, the thing that really that I walked away with Coach Rivera is that he's just a real dude. The thing that I was really happy with him is you asked a question, or whoever, Jordan, I'm going to butcher her last name.
Rodrigue. Yep.
Yeah. I got to meet her there. She asked some awesome questions. I mean, like, that was kind of one of the developmental points for me. I was kind of watching her in some of the conversations, and I'm like, oh, that's a good question. Oh, that's a good question. Kind of storing them away later. So in the future, I can be the smart guy asking the really good questions. She was awesome, but he doesn't think. He doesn't pause. Like, he answers your questions. And I know that seems like a kind of a small thing, but when you're dealing in an event that essentially just breeds circumlocution, like having a coach come up there and just instantly spit out an answer shows you kind of the genuineness of what he's saying and that he means what he says, where
authenticity.
Exactly. Whereas comparatively, like Dan Quinn, like I sat in on his presser, and there were some awkward silences in between some of the questions, some of the answers he gave, and you could just kind of tell he was formulating an answer. John Gruden is another one. Like, he's just a guy who just spits out that information. James was able to talk to him off the side after his presser was done, and he's the same guy off the podium as he was on the podium. And you just kind of get the feeling for who's comfortable in their skin and comfortable with what they're presenting in front of everybody, and who is definitely putting up barriers. So that was a lot of things. That was one of the most interesting things to see. And Coach Rivera is definitely he is who he is, which I respect, to a certain extent.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Cody, one of the cool things about hearing that answer, though, when we discuss the need for maybe a change right? Or discontent with someone, that tells you something a little bit about the value of being there before. Is that experience does matter. And the fact is that you're not learning how to coach. You're not, actually you are always learning how to do your job better. But imagine being the first time asking the questions, the first time trying to do the hand 40s, the first time doing these things. Even if you're remarkably talented, there is something to say about being there more than once. Now, when David sent me a message, he said, "What do you want me to ask if I can get there to Coach Rivera?" This is my favorite part. I gave him the most specific question, and he goes, "I don't think that's the questions you ask at the combine." And that was, I asked him because I'm dying to know how come KK is on the left and Dontari Poe is on the right when we do our tackle stuff. And I'm sitting there and I send him that answer. He goes, "I think they're more interested in people that they're scouting." Dave, you sent me the nicest response back. And all right, so then I revised my question back and I said, "Hey, we need offensive linemen. How do you gauge this when you're drafting a person about versatility? You need a center, you need a tackle, you need a guard, right? Like, how do you balance the idea of a good player on the line with versatility?" You said you were there, sitting there, and Jordan asked a similar question. Tell me, what did you take away from that? And Ron Rivera, how do coaches balance this, the need, right, for tackle, guard, center, with the desire for certain versatility?
Right. So, yeah, she definitely asked a question hitting on that topic. And it's funny because he actually I can't remember what sparked it, but he actually talked about Short and Poe a little bit, and I was kind of hoping, I was like, oh man, I can actually get that question. Like, it actually kind of fit in the flow of the conversation. Yeah, but the moment passed. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to ask it to him. If I was one of the beat writers, I would have, because so that's something I don't know if everybody knows, but when they leave the podium, they kind of go off. I call it the shadows. They go off into the shadows with all the beat writers for the team, and they get to kind of pester them one-on-one without the national guys and everybody else around. But obviously, not being a Panthers beat writer, I didn't partake in that session. But yeah, as far as versatility on the offensive line, I mean, I think a lot of the coaches pretty much echo the same sentiment where, you have kind of your premium positions, and especially having a right-handed quarterback, your left tackle is always going to be a premium position. Your center is going to be a huge position. And I know that's something that you guys are kind of looking for. And the ability to be versatile is key, but at the same time, you want to make sure they're good at what you're going to ask them to do. So it's like having, offenses like to run kind of a high-low system with their wide receivers. So you want that big guy who can high point the ball, or your average size guy who can jump through the roof and go up and high point the ball. But you also want your guy with strong hands who can make the play, under the linebackers or between the safety and the linebackers. And they don't always need to do everything. So you can have a guy like Curtis Samuel who kind of fits a specific role within your offense and be able to utilize him properly while other guys fill in those gaps. So it's just really all a balancing act. And if you can get some of the same things in those guys, and that's where you get kind of your first round talents. A guy like Garrett Bradbury is someone who comes to mind for the Carolina Panthers. I think that's going to be a guy who should be near or at the top of their board because he can do what they need him to do now, but he also provides versatility. So in the future, if they need to ask him to shift over and do one or two other things on the left or right side of the offensive line, he can also be successful there.
It really does kind of make me wonder, so you mentioned Bradbury, who I have seen lately in discussion for the 16th pick. I've even seen someone like Andre Dillard, who has been shooting up draft boards as a left tackle prospect. He tested very well. It really makes me wonder, what the Panthers value more, the interior of that offensive line like we had in 2015 with Andrew Norwell, Khalil, and Trey Turner.
Great point.
Or do we want that franchise left tackle that basically Cam Newton has not had
Jordan
since
Gross.
2013 when Jordan Gross left? So my question to you is, was there any sort of inclination as to what positions the Panthers are looking at or looked at in the combine and around this time of year?
Specifically, as far as along the offensive line, no, that's not something that we were able to get out of them. I don't know if the beat writers got anything out of them,
or not even on the offensive line, just positions in general on the field, just anywhere.
Yeah, I feel like offensive line and edge are definitely going to be the priorities for the Panthers coming into their draft strategy. And I don't know how you guys feel about it. So me being an outsider as far as the Panthers are concerned, looking at the draft class and looking at draft needs, what are your guys' thoughts on Shaq Thompson moving inside if you guys go to a 3-4?
That's been a big point of discussion with us on the podcast. We've been talking about Shaq a lot. Some of us are higher on him. Some of us are lower on him. Tony and I want us to re-sign Shaq just so that way he wouldn't cost as much towards the salary this year.
$9 million right now.
Around $9 million. I wouldn't mind him as another inside linebacker next to Luke. I do not trust his ability to rush the passer as an outside linebacker in a 3-4 defense. But he certainly isn't a bad piece on our roster.
He would have
to
be the 4, the least. He more of a coverage guy, right? Well, here, and maybe we need the outsider perspective on this. Is David? The one thing that concerns me as we hear these talks about the Panthers potentially giving multiple looks, what we don't know is, are they committed to just mixing it up, right? Do we want to give a couple of 3-4 looks throughout the game, or do we really want to philosophically shift to a 3-4 defense? And where I think we're sitting at this is we don't know. We don't know what to do. If we're right now, there's deficiencies in the defense that we run. What do you do when you shift to the other defense? Now, the question is, I would say this. We shift to a 3-4 defense, and you want to put out a Shaq Thompson, you want to put out a Luke Kuechly, you want to maybe drop a Marquise Haynes in there. I don't know. How have you ever seen? Have you been a part of a team that philosophically shifted? And not like, obviously you're not in the team, but have you seen the team shift from a 4-3 to a 3-4? I'm kind of just nervous about the idea, period. I don't really know how to even think about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tricky. And I know, like, the Giants are a team that did it last year. The Buccaneers are actually in the process of doing it this year with their new coaching staff. They're expected to move from a 4-3 to a 3-4. And with the Carolina Panthers, I mean, just kind of looking at the roster, I mean, I think moving to a 3-4 makes a lot of sense because you have Dontari Poe who can secure the line.
Exactly.
And I think Short and I think Vernon Butler, honestly, I mean, I don't know kind of how the Panthers fan base feels about him. Vernon Butler is a guy
we don't know.
High on.
We just don't know.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
There's a lot of mystery.
Very much.
Mystery.
Yeah.
I thought when he came out of the draft into the draft that he fit best as a 3-4 defensive end. So moving to a 3-4 could very well breathe some new life into his career. Perfect timing too, because you got to decide what you guys are going to do with him next year, right? So that would be great. And I think Luke Kuechly, obviously one of the best guys in the middle.
He can do whatever. He can do whatever.
Yeah. Moving Thompson there in the middle with him, I think you've got a very solid 5-man group right there, kind of at the front, and then in the middle of your defense. So then what you're really looking for is your edge, and this is the class. Like if the Carolina Panthers are going to make a move to a 3-4, this is the class to do it because you can literally find an edge in the second round and the third round if you want to go offensive line in the first round, and you're literally going to draft 3 starters if you do that. And I legitimately think that you're going to draft 3 starters in the first 3 rounds if you have that capability to do that.
Let's talk about.
I don't know if the Panthers have a 3rd round draft pick, to be honest.
We do. We got every round. We got every round. So tell me this, as just to piggyback on that statement. Why is this? You're at the draft. Why is the? I mean, not at the draft. You're at the combine. Why is this the year of the edge rusher?
They're just, oh man, like this might be the best defense, like pass rushing class in the history of the NFL. And that was that was said so many times during the combine, and it's the truth. I mean, it's just the honest truth. And when you look at some of these kids, I mean, you look at some of these guys and you can read through some of the quote unquote BS, right? They've all been coached by their agents. They've all been taught by their PR people on how to dance and perform in front of the media. And that's great. But there's just something about having experience and just talking to people, whether you've covered sports or you just talk to people in your day-to-day life. If you interact with people on a regular basis, you know how to read through a certain level of BS. And some of these guys, I mean, you look at guys like Brian Burns, you look at guys like Montez Sweat, you look at guys like Jalen Ferguson, they're ready to eat. Like, they're going through this process, but you can see almost when you look at them and talk to them that the energy to just get out there and fight on the NFL field is just ready to go. And then you kind of look at, and that's where you got to pick the right pieces, right? Because then you look at a guy like Ja'Kai Polite. I know he's gotten a lot of heat, the kid out of Florida. And I'll be honest with you, I agree with a lot of the heat that he's getting, but not for the reason he's getting it. Honestly, the kid, he came across very soft, very unsure of himself, very hesitant, and that's not the guy you want to put on the edge of your defense. So like I said, the picks got to fit, but this is the year, like I said, to do the switch if you want to, because you got a lot of hungry dudes out there ready to be the best in what's going to end up being the best edge rusher class in the history of the NFL.
Yeah, David, I could not agree with you more, man. Then there's even players that don't necessarily have the name value that are going to be available in the second and the third round. The Charles Omenihu's, the Ben Bonovu's, the Chase Winovich's. There really are a lot of players that you said,
what's that kid from Old Dominion? What's the kid?
O'Shane Zimenez.
I kind of like him too. I know everybody's down on him, but go ahead.
Well, he has a lot of potential, certainly. But David, my question to you is, how many players were you able to interview in your time at the Combine? And I know you mentioned Ja'Kai Polite, and I feel his interviews got the most coverage because it kept on saying that the teams were bashing him and just had nothing good to say. And overall, just his performance wasn't very good in the drills. So, was there an interview that stood out to you as someone who? I can't say would be a fit for the Panthers, but just kind of blew you away on the microphone and that you think would be a day one starter, kind of just from their maturity that you saw in their interviews.
Yeah, there were a few. So quarterbacks, we really didn't talk to a lot of quarterbacks. The Buccaneers are pretty sold on Jameis Winston right now. Right. So we didn't talk to a whole lot of quarterbacks. I know James, my co-host over Locked On Bucs, he talked to his name is the Penn State kid, McSorley. He talked to McSorley. Yeah, and I mean physical stuff aside, like just the way the guy carries himself in his presence. James came away very impressed with him, just kind of as a mature leader, so to speak. Which take that with a grain of salt. But Ja'Kai Polite, yeah, I mean the bashing thing. So I've seen some tweets since then. Some guys who actually got video of the conversation. So his bashing thing. Basically, what he was just saying is that the NFL teams were showing him film and saying, like, hey, on this play you got beat, or on this play you got swallowed up, or on this play, you had a penalty or whatever. Explain to me what you were doing, why. And then what they try to do is say, okay, we would like you to do it this way instead. Do you understand? And then kind of demonstrate that you understand what they're saying. So when he was saying they were bashing him, that's basically what he was talking about. And that is echoed by many, many of the other prospects. The difference is they're not using the word bashing. And that's really where Ja'Kai Polite kind of went south.
Why do you think that was?
I think it's just verbiage. I think that's just the way he talks. And I felt really bad for him, man, because I'm not going to lie. I'm standing there with all the other media people standing around his podium, and I can see the writing on the wall. I'm like, dude, just stop saying that they're bashing.
Just say, yeah, you could have just used a different word. You're saying it.
Right, exactly.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. So, but now take that. So he did have a terrible media session. However, that's not the reason why. At one point in time, he was asked about what he looks for when he watches film of himself, and he said he doesn't watch film on himself, which I know isn't true. Because I guarantee you the coaches at Florida make them self-scout. So I don't know if he just didn't understand the question or just kind of the lights and everything. He's a guy who very much, he seemed like he's a people pleaser. Like, as media members were laughing at some of the things he was saying, he kind of continued along that path. And what he didn't realize is those weren't things. They weren't laughing because they were good things that he was saying. they were laughing because there were buzzwords and there were things that they were going to be able to use later to kind of expose some things. And it's unfortunate for him. It just kind of shows the immaturity of some of these guys. And then, the physical stuff.
How old is he? Do you know?
I honestly don't know.
I'll look it up.
But,
what and I hate to interrupt on that, but
no.
Does that kind of factor a little bit into how these guys, I tell you this, is I know I'm a different person at 19 and 22. I'm a different person at 22 and 30, right? I'm going to look up his age, but you're talking about, you're 20. So 20. He's a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I don't think it's going to be as impactful as maybe some people think it is. I do think that he slipped out of the first round, but that's because of the physical side of it. That's the more concerning side of this whole thing is he showed up carrying a lot of bad weight. You can pretty much tell he really hasn't been working out like he should be.
Tell us a little bit. What happened with him?
Just all of his measurables. So, well, not all of his measurables because he didn't even finish the workout. The biggest thing is that after he came out, showed a poor performance in the initial part of the actual workout day, he kind of came up with an injury. And this was an injury that definitely did. I saw one draft analyst tweet out, Ja'Kai Polite forgot to fake the injury before he reported it. And that's kind of the big things. Like you saw guys like Greedy Williams not be able to finish his workout because he started getting cramps. The thing, though, about Greedy Williams is you saw him physically start getting cramps during some of the drills, so you can kind of explain some of the gaps in his performance because you could see his body physically getting injured. They're cramps, so it's not a legit thing, but you could see that with Ja'Kai Polite. You never saw that. It was an after thing. It was an after
exactly.
Thing. It was just a bad start
hurt.
to his.
I was hurt.
Yep. Yeah, and it just comes across as an excuse. Now, his pro day is going to be huge because the maturity thing, like you guys said, he's a kid. He's a baby, whatever you want to call him. He's young. If you draft Ja'Kai Polite, you're probably not drafting him to be the face of your franchise. So you're not really worried about ushering him out in front of the media, 24/7 and all that stuff. He's not going to be your Cam Newton. So you're not too worried about that. The performance is the big thing. The body shape is the other big thing. If he can come back from his pro day and show that he learned his lesson, that he realized his mistakes, that stuff can be forgiven. And he could potentially crawl back into kind of the back end of the first round. But I think any top 15 talk on Ja'Kai Polite is done.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
That's funny that you say that because, I've been doing some scouting myself recently. And, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is how do you value or weigh potential versus production? So, for example,
great question.
So Rashawn Gary, this is a player that he was the number one high school player when he went to Michigan. He's an absolute freak athlete, just a dominant player. And, he didn't put up the numbers that they expected him to put up. He only had 3.5 sacks at Michigan. Whereas you have a player like Cleveland Farrell from Clemson, and he put up, 11.5 sacks in his time at Clemson, but they're saying, well, he doesn't bend well, and he isn't the most athletic player. So if you're a player sitting in the middle of the draft, like the Panthers are, and let's say Rashawn falls all the way down, how much do you put on the physical traits that a player displays rather than the amount of numbers that they either did or didn't put up when they were in college?
Yeah, I think production at the end of the day has to be it's part of the equation, but it's more of a I would call it more of a tiebreaker than anything else. It depends on the position you're talking about, obviously, as well. When you're talking about wide receivers, you're looking for good catch rates, you're looking for good catch percentages and all that stuff. But I just saw a clip today of DK Metcalf completely turning his defender around and burning him and just making him look stupid. Yeah. And then the pass was 5 yards behind him. Okay, so I'm not going to hold that incompletion against DK Metcalf. What I'm looking for there is how he got off the line against press, how he manipulated his guy with his body and his feet, and how he was able to just kind of turn that guy around. Now, at the same time, what school are we talking about? Because if that's Greedy Williams, then it means a lot more than if it's, insert name here from some small school. It's going to be easier to do that. You look at Deebo Samuel. And I know we're kind of getting off Rashawn Gary, but there's a clip of Debo doing the same thing, manipulating a slot defender. Well, I can't remember the name of the school, but it was a very small school, not one of your top programs in the country. So is he going to be able to do that against a slot defender in the NFL? So when you look at a guy like Gary, what worries me about guys like him is the fact that he's winning because of his natural ability, and it's kind of hard to do.
It's easy in college, isn't it? To win on your natural ability.
Yep, and that's where Ed Oliver is another player who has some people worried because some of the competition he was playing against, he's so much more physically dominant than his opponent that he never really needed to lean on the technical side of his game. Now, does that mean they can't be technical? Well, that's what the workouts are for. That's what the combine pad drills are for, to see some of that bend. Montez Sweat had some questions about his bend coming into the Senior Bowl. Coming out of the Senior Bowl, it was kind of a mixed bag. Like, some people said they saw enough bend out of him. Some people said they didn't see enough bend out of him. They were still real tight in the knees and the hips. But then coming into the draft, I mean, that dude, it was like he was floating parallel sometimes. I mean, that dude showed bend for days, you know what I mean? So he answered a lot of those questions. If he performs at his pro day, he'll have an opportunity to show that he's continuing that, and that'll put some of those things at ease. So that's kind of where you have that balance between the two. And some of that can come in the interview stage, because some of the players talked about being asked things about their technique and how they plan on getting better and what parts of their games they want to improve. And if a player, I want to say, I'm trying to remember who it was. I want to say Ed Oliver was one who was asked by a media member, where's an area of your game that you want to improve and how do you want to do it? And the answer he gave, I mean, you'd have thought this was a coach standing up on a whiteboard breaking down how to train defensive ends and defensive linemen. It was just great. But then if you get a guy who says, well, I want to get better using my hands, so, when the coaches tell me how to use my hands better, I'll just do it. Well, that's not going to give you a whole lot of confidence that this is a self-starter who can get better in those areas you haven't seen because of production. And I think he was really handcuffed a little bit by Michigan, especially in the defense. I mean, if your gap penetrators aren't eating their gaps, eating their blocks as a linebacker, you're not going to be able to do the things you need to do. If coverage schemes, if when he's in coverage in the middle of the field, if he's having to kind of back up and eat two receivers or eat two routes because another guy isn't hanging with his guy, that's going to look a little bit different. It's going to make him more tentative, which could then actually look like stiffness when you look at tape. And I think he kind of fell victim to a lot of that.
One thing I saw, it was a guy on Twitter talking about how people drone on and on about how tape and film have to be the main determinant. Mm-hmm. And he was saying this. Then he went on to criticize that, like, well, you have to understand in the context of tape, you could be playing inferior competition. All of these different things, similarly to what you were saying, the limitations of just looking at stats. For me, what my single thing was this, is that we have data. That's all we have. We have data. We have the combine data. We have the film data. We have the interview data. But at the end of the day, the data the data is not equal, right? Is that it is weighted. That is, like, we can't overwhelm ourselves when it comes to the data of just like, hey, this guy ran a 40 time. We go crazy. And then you look at the tape, and you can't let the tape overwhelm the physical attributes data, right? So now that you've been at the combine, you've seen all this data. Has your position, David, changed a little bit in how you evaluate it? You go, and it's a hard question to ask, but what I'm asking is this, is that you haven't been to the combine before, but now you've been there. Do you less value? Has the data value changed for you, I guess? Did we lose David?
You there, David?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm here.
Okay.
From a football theology standpoint, I've always favored a 3-4 defense, which is weird because I've covered the Bucs, and until this year, they've basically always been a 4-3 base defense. And from an offensive standpoint, I prefer a very aggressive downfield style, which is why I love coaches like Bruce Arians so much, and why I love the fact that Todd Bowles is coming and take over the Buccaneers defense because they basically fit exactly the kind of things that I like to see. Now, when you're talking about player evaluations, I've always looked for, like, when I judge who I like and who I want to see on my team or on the team that I'm covering, I'm always looking for the fighter's mentality, and I'm always looking for physical athletic ability over production, and even necessarily over what physical things they were able to show in college, if that makes sense. So I'm always reminded of Michael Thomas. If you can't tell, wide receiver is one of my favorite positions to evaluate. Michael Thomas, coming out of Ohio State, was a second, sometimes even third round draft pick, depending on some of the draft experts and everything else. And I absolutely hated it. I was pulling what little hair I have out, screaming at the top of any podcast that would have me on, saying that Michael Thomas was a day one talent if I've ever seen one before. And the benefit I had was I was actually able to attend Ohio State's pro day that year and see Michael Thomas in the flesh, in person, in front of the scouts. And what he was doing in his pro day, and I think that Keyshawn Johnson probably had a lot, because they're related, probably had a lot to do with this, is he was showing a lot of the routes that he wasn't able to run while he played at Ohio State, because Ohio State's pass offense, especially under head coach Urban Meyer, is very simplified, and it doesn't ask the receivers to do a whole lot of things. What Urban Meyer liked to do at Ohio State with his offense is a lot of getting his receivers open using scheme versus using moves. So he didn't really ask them to make a lot of breaks. He didn't really ask them to be very versatile in how they ran their routes, because he would use 2 or 3 routes on the same side of the field to get somebody open just from the scheme itself, which is fine. But that's why you see some of these Ohio State receivers being so undervalued. I don't know how Panthers fans feel about Curtis Samuel. I feel like he probably could be more effective in the offense than he has been if he was used a little bit differently. Michael Thomas obviously has proven me right in that he was clearly a day one talent. I mean, probably the best wide receiver in that draft class if you go back and look at it. Jalen Marshall is a guy who came out with Michael Thomas, and until he met with some injury issues and some other issues, performance-wise, he went from a late draft pick to their number 3 receiver in the blink of an eye. And then, like I said, injury and some other things happened. And now he's in the Alliance of American Football playing for Orlando Apollos. But I see guys like Paris Campbell, and that was funny. I see guys like Paris Campbell, and I see very similar things.
Skinny. She's way too skinny.
Yeah. I see Paris Campbell coming out this year and some of the other Ohio State receivers coming out this year, and I see very similar things in them. And Paris Campbell was able to show a lot of that in the combine. That dude has got athletic ability for days. I've been watching him since he was a freshman. Like, he caught my eye as a freshman in Columbus, and I've only seen him get better. He did have some ball issues earlier. He's fixed those ball issues. If you watch this last season, he's got good hands now. I don't think he's ever going to be like a fly trap hands type of guy, but he's got good hands. He's got the size. He's got the physicality. He's got the wingspan. He's got the athleticism. So now you get a guy like that. Now this is where I love coaches like Bruce Arians and even guys like Ron Rivera, because they talk about teaching versus executing. It's not on the players to execute our vision. It's on us to teach them what they need to do to execute what we need them to do. And that's where guys like Michael Thomas, that's where guys like Paris Campbell can come into a franchise and do wonders, because they get taught how to use all those athletic skills. So what I want is a guy who wants to eat and has athletic ability, because I can teach you everything else.
Isn't it, it's almost like a vindication when a draft crush that you have ends up going into the NFL and just blows it up. So, you were talking about Michael Thomas. For mine last year, it was Justin Reed, who went to the Texans. I thought it was a first-round prospect, and, the fact that he fell all the way to the 3rd round was just criminal in my mind. And then when you watch him play this year, he balled out. He was a guy that I loved for the Panthers last year.
And why they're going to let potentially the Honey Badger walk.
Mm-hmm. It certainly plays into it. But, and, you mentioned receivers, and I kind of have I'll go ahead and start with this. You mentioned, Michael Thomas was someone that you really liked coming out. There's a player that a lot of Panther fans, including myself, have an eye on. His name is Hakeem Butler. And that's another one who I feel, for a guy his size, he's incredibly athletic, big arms, catch radius is insane. And, we're going to lose Devin Funchess. We're going to let him test the free agent waters. what do you think or what do you know about Butler? And do you feel that's another guy who might be another Michael Thomas type receiver, a big frame, runs his routes well, and uses that physicality to be able to win downfield?
Yeah, I like Butler a lot. I think that he made a lot of money at the combine. I think he's going to continue to make money throughout the process. Nice. I don't think so. I didn't get to speak to him directly. I don't think he's one of the guys that the Buccaneers spoke to specifically, but I do know that there were a lot of media people around Indianapolis who were kind of buzzing around him, and they kind of actually turned me on to watching him more than I had before because I hadn't actually watched a lot of him. I'd have to go back to watch a lot of his tape to see if some of the athleticism shows back up in the film. But again, that's kind of one of those situations where you see this kid with this superior athletic ability, and if he's got that hunger and if he's got that willingness to fight and get better, then that could be something you can work with and put together. And if he's still there in the second or the third rounds, I mean, this is becoming a very good wide receiver class. I liked this wide receiver class kind of from the jump, but more and more, like as each day passes by, I'm seeing more and more for like the national media talking about this wide receiver class. If you guys don't know about Brad Kelly, who works over for the Draft Network, that dude is probably one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver guys.
We've been talking with him on Twitter today, actually.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, if you want to know wide receivers, you get him on the show, and he's yeah. I mean, he might spin your head a little bit, but he's very smart on wide receivers, and I know that he's got some good things to say about him as well.
Let me ask you this: it's kind of I'm going to give you a tough question to start, an easy one to finish. The tougher question is this: is because my wife's family are all Georgia alumni. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Ledbetter, a couple of problems early in his college career. They seemingly seem minor. And what I mean by that is like, hey, what 19-year-old kid doesn't get a drinking ticket? And then you're a 19-year-old football superstar. Did Jonathan Ledbetter, did you get any sense? Was he able to kind of alleviate some of the concerns with his personality? Because to me, I think he could fall in the draft unnecessarily. There was big talent there. What do you think about Ledbetter?
So I've seen Ledbetter. I haven't studied Ledbetter, and there's a very big difference in Cody. I'm sure you would agree with that. So from what I've seen, I think he definitely has an NFL skill set. I think he can be successful in the NFL. However, as far as interviews and everything, I honestly don't know anything about any of his interviews. I don't think he interviewed with the Buccaneers. And as you guys know, being the combine, I'm really focused on what the Buccaneers are doing. So I don't know how he interviewed, but in these types of situations, there's a whole lot of good and usually only a few bads. So if the national media hasn't grabbed on to a morsel of bad news, I would assume they at least went average to good, if that helps at all.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
As you're out there, who's rising in your books? Who is it? What? Actually, I don't know. You tell us. You take the show over. What is going on? What do you want to talk about? Who's going up? Who's going down? What do you want to talk about?
I think all the guys who are dropping are pretty much universal. Like Jonah Williams. I mean, Jonah Williams started off the draft season as like a top 5 guy. Like a lot of people were mocking him to the Bucs at 5, and now he's more of kind of a mid first round. I've seen him as low as like 18, 19, even in some mock drafts, and a lot of it is stemming from whether or not NFL teams feel like he can play tackle or he can play guard. And then again, his interview. So I know how he interacted with the media, and that's always something that we have to keep in perspective as well. Is these players don't care as much about how they interview with the media as much as they do how they interview with the actual teams themselves. So to the media itself, he kind of came off as a little bit disinterested, a little bit borderline rude. I wouldn't say completely rude, but just you could tell he was kind of sick of answering the questions about having shorter arms, and he actually has a couple pretty funny moments.
I would be too, right?
Yeah, no, I don't blame him at all. The only thing that he's got to remember, and again, this kind of goes back to, is he really going to be the face of your franchise? Probably not. Like even like Joe Thomas wasn't necessarily the guy at the podium every day for the Cleveland Browns while he was in his career. So I mean, a guy like Jonah Williams is probably not going to be in front of the media as much as he was for the combine. But just kind of the overall demeanor just really didn't sit well with a lot of people. And then especially when you look 2 podiums down and you've got a guy like Dalton Reisner who is sitting there with the same circumstances with people saying he's probably not going to be a tackle. He's probably going to be a guard. And he literally at one point, and this kind of lets you know how much he made an impact. At one point he was asked, how do you feel about, or where do you think teams see you right now? And he said, I think most teams see me as a right tackle, but I know some of them see me as a guard. And that's fine, because if you want me to be a guard and be the best guard you ever had, and that's the attitude you want. Whereas Jonah Williams said, if you want me to play guard, I'll play guard, but I'm telling you, I'm a left tackle. Well, that kind of rubs people a little bit the wrong way. Now, again, I don't know that he said those in the interviews. I haven't heard anything coming out of his interviews about him being, disrespectful or kind of saying those kinds of things.
But that was your impression, though. I mean,
that was a lot of people's impression. Yeah, it was a little bit off-putting. As far as risers, obviously Montez Sweat, absolutely balled out. I still don't think he's a top 5 guy, but I think he's definitely worked his way into the top 15 conversation. Ben Minogu, you mentioned him. That dude lit it up. If he can replicate some of the same things that he did at the combine on his pro day, he's only going to continue climbing. I think he's definitely a day 2 guy who's made some money. And then Paris Campbell. He's my favorite receiver of the entire draft. And it kind of helps because I'm an Ohio State fan at the same time. But that's not why he's my favorite guy. He's my favorite guy because he absolutely blew it up for his draft stock himself. I still think he's a day 2 guy, but I think he's going to go much earlier than originally expected.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Listen, I'm a diehard Clemson Tiger fan. So whenever I see Cleveland Farrell mocked to the Panthers at 16, I'm a happy camper. But, I wanted to talk about a guy that I've seen even going to Tampa Bay as early as 5 and sparked somewhat of a discussion last Tuesday night between Tony and I when we were talking about him. And that's a guy by the name of Devin White. And I know, maybe you even mentioned him when we were talking about Shaq Thompson, or maybe you were going to mention him. We're going to a 3-4 defense, or moving at least to have some of those fronts mixed in on our defense and what we do. And, I mentioned the fact that, man, if you put Devin White next to Luke good luck being able to run the football. You know what I mean? I think Devin White is an incredible prospect. But I even know that Quan Alexander, that's his boy. They were going back and forth on Twitter about, wanting Devin White to come to Tampa Bay. Do you have a feel for how far Devin White could go in this draft? And do you feel even a place like Tampa Bay might be a nice landing spot for Devin White?
I feel like right now, as it stands today, Devin White's going top 10. The Buccaneers absolutely love him. Wow. He interviewed amazingly with the Buccaneers from what I'm told. I wasn't in the room, obviously. But from what I'm told, he absolutely blew the roof off the place with the Buccaneers. And you can kind of tell sometimes how things went with some of these players. You get a feel because you ask. So for those who don't know, so every player meets with every team right. in an informal fashion, right? It's kind of like a round robin, like, hey, here's this team, here's this team, here's this team. And those are kind of considered meetings, but they're not really what people are asking for. So when you get a player who says, oh, yeah, I met with everybody. Well, that means that they're not getting a whole lot of formal interviews, which is kind of embarrassing to say in public because it means that there's not a lot of teams out there kind of digging for information. Now, there's two reasons that happens. Some guys, you look at a guy like Foster Moreau out of LSU. Yeah. He's kind of a known identity. Like people kind of know what you're going to get from him. So they're not going to spend a formal interview on him because you kind of already know what you're going to get. Whereas when you look at a guy like a Kyler Murray, because obviously the headlines, you look at a guy like a Jonah Williams or some of these guys like Montez Sweat, you want to sit down and talk with them because you don't know fully how you're going to grasp a guy like that. So it's kind of weird. But when you look at Devin White, so Devin White had, I want to say the day we spoke to him, he had 19 formal meetings scheduled, okay, or scheduled or completed. When we asked about the Buccaneers, that dude lit up like a Christmas tree. Wow. I don't think I've ever seen a smile bigger on a kid's face. And not only the connection with Quan Alexander, but also Kendall Beckwith, a linebacker for the Buccaneers, who may or may not be able to play. Actually, he's kind of coming back from an ankle injury that apparently may actually be career threatening. But The idea for Devin White, and these are his words. I'm not going to quote him right now, but in his words, the idea of being on the same team as Quan Alexander and Kendall Beckwith is basically a dream. Like that would just be an amazing experience for him and something that he's definitely down for. I'm sure being the 5th overall pick helps that situation. But that's definitely so, because I mean, he was asked about like the Lions and the Packers. And he's like, yeah, I talked to them. Yeah, I talked to them. He's friends with Jared Davis there in Detroit. He's like, would you like to play with him? He's like, yeah, Jared's cool. I like to play with him. No problem. But I mean, when you asked about the Bucs and Quan Alexander, I mean, that dude, I mean, you just made his day asking about that. And I know, like I said, we're being told the Bucs love him as well. Jason Light loves to play the draft game. I think he probably grew up playing Madden because that dude loves to trade as often as he can. And I really feel like there's probably, if Devin White is the target, I think they're probably looking to trade back to 8, 9, or 10, depending on who they can get to trade up with them, and take him in that range versus taking him at 5. Only because I want to say there's only been 2 linebackers. The way I put it was, since the Patriots started winning Super Bowls, there's only been 2 linebackers drafted in the top 5 for a reason. So if they could trade out to 8 or 9 or 10 and then draft him there, I think that would be the best spot for the Buccaneers. But I know they love him, and some of that is going to depend on whether or not Quan Alexander gets signed. If Quan comes back, interior linebacker is a little bit less of a need for the Buccaneers than it is without Quan, because the Buccaneers also have Kevin Minter, who was a second-round draft pick in Arizona when Bruce Arians was there, and they were running a 3-4 system. So if he's a guy that they feel like can be that second interior linebacker to a Quan Alexander, obviously that drops Devin White's stock on their board just a little bit. I don't think the Panthers need a guy like Devin White or even Devin Bush, because I don't think Shaq Thompson makes sense as a 3-4 outside linebacker. So if you draft an interior linebacker like Devin White or Devin Bush, I feel like you have to move on from Shaq Thompson. And I don't know if the Panthers really want to do that. I think their best bet is to keep Shaq Thompson, move him inside with Kuechly, and hit the edge. If I had to do, when I was kind of preparing to talk to you guys tonight, actually, just because I'm a draft nerd, right? So I kind of did like a little mini mock draft in my own head. If I were the Panthers, this is perfect world, right? And I didn't run through a full, round simulator or anything like that, but this is just perfect world. If I'm the Panthers, what I'm looking to do is grab Garrett Bradbury in the 1st, and I'm looking to grab Jalen Ferguson in the 2nd, and I'm looking to grab Ben Benogu in the 3rd. And if you do that, I think you just drafted 3 starters that are going to help protect your quarterback, help Christian McCaffrey find space, and then your defense is going to be in a very good way, in a very good position. And honestly, I would go wide receiver in the 4th.
How do you feel about Devin White? Is that, I know you mentioned, if you sign Quan Alexander, then maybe it doesn't make as much sense to draft him at 5. But I mean, you're a Tampa Bay guy. Is there any player right now that you're kind of in love with for your team right now?
I love Devin. Ed Oliver is someone that more in the 12 to 15 range that I like, but I think that drafting Ed Oliver means that the Buccaneers move on from Gerald McCoy. So we'll kind of see how that goes. There's rumors back and forth on whether or not the Bucs are going to commit to Gerald McCoy or move on. So we don't really know what's happening there. I think edge is more important than the interior linebacker position if they bring back Quan. But something about Quan is that he's been their radio guy the entire time he's been in Tampa Bay. So if you lose Quan, not only are you losing your middle linebacker, but you're losing the guy who's set your defense for the last 4 years, and that's bigger than maybe anything else.
All right, we're getting towards the end of this, and fantastic information here. For me, one of the things that stands out is the idea is, and obviously today with the news that Vernon Olivier, I can't ever determine who the actor is and who the player is. I know who I'm talking about is.
I believe it's Olivier.
Yeah, is that the idea is that he was a 4-3 defensive end in Miami, and then he's an outside linebacker when he goes to, like you said, the Giants transition. And for me, when I hear the word linebacker, I'm like, gosh, that cannot be a top 10 pick or a top 5, at least, like you were saying. But then you add into the fact that there's the potential, like, you're not really a linebacker, you're really a defensive end, you're a stand-up defensive end in a 3-4. Then that changes the game, Right. Now, what I want to ask, and the final question is this, is we want to know about the Bucs. We want to know, Arians coming in. He's a buddy. Him and Jameis Winston are buddy. You got Mike Evans. You've got some offensive weapons. There have been some questions on the offensive line. You just signed your left tackle to a notable deal, but not giant. Yeah. Notable, but not giant. Where are the Bucs at this point heading into free agency in the draft?
So the Buccaneers need a right guard. They're moving. So their right guard from last year, Caleb Benenoch, did not do well. Let's just put it that way. They're moving him back to tackle. So in 2017,
that sounds worse. Moving from guard to tackle sounds like a worse decision.
So the funny thing about that is in 2017, he actually was a tackle on the team, and he filled in a little bit here and there for injury and stuff like that, and kind of giving guys rest and here and there and all that. And he didn't do too poorly as a right tackle. Now, he was a rookie. He was definitely not a high round draft pick or anything like that. He did all right. He had some potential. He showed some potential. I really liked what he showed in his rookie year. And then last year they moved him to right guard. And I'm not gonna lie, when the move first happened, I was very skeptical about it. But I was like, well, I like Caleb. I like what he brings. We'll see. I kind of felt like he was undersized to play inside, and it basically showed to be true. So now they're moving him back outside to right tackle. DeMar Dotson, they just picked up an option on him. He's old as hell. I mean, he's going to be retiring here in the next year or two. So what I think they're trying to do is see if Caleb can kind of start to develop to become that future starting right tackle. So in the meantime, they always have a gap at right guard. They don't have a lot of cap space right now. There's some talks under the table, and I mean, contracts really. I mean, when Jason Light and what the Buccaneers have done in the front office, they can handle contracts. So I'm not really worried about cap space, but I don't know if they're going to necessarily go out and try to sign a veteran right guard to kind of plug and play. What I really feel like the Buccaneers are trying to do is grab a right guard either in the first round, involving a trade back, or in the second round. They're early in day 2. Dalton Reisner is a guy that I have on my radar for a day 2 pick if he makes it that far to come in and be able to play that right guard position and really kind of shore up that offensive line. Linebacker, obviously, like you said, depending on what happens with Quan. As I sit right now, whenever I write something or talk on the podcast, I don't count Quan as being on the team because as of right now, he's not on the 2019 roster.
He's a great player, though. Great.
He really
player.
is.
He's so good.
What I feel like they're doing is something that the Patriots have been known to do is say, hey, we love you. We want you. We're not meeting on the number. Go out into the open, see what you can. It's like an NFL rumspringer, right? Like go see what's out there for you. And when you realize all that stuff is evil, come back to us and we'll make things happen. However, I feel like he's going to go out into the world and find out that everybody loves him. And I'm worried that when they let him go, he's not coming back.
Right.
Which is what makes Devin White such an attractive option. And linebackers, and we have the same talk actually within the Bucs Nation staff. Linebackers definitely aren't usually considered high draft picks, especially your middle linebackers. Even though they kind of set everything and do all that, they're just not. So it is a little bit scary. However, when you look at this class, Devin White and Devin Bush are your 2 starting inside linebackers in this draft class. After that, they're all backups. They're all depth. So if you don't have Quan Alexander, Kevin Minter did all right last year. He can't be your primary inside linebacker moving to a 3-4. You got to get a stud to replace him with. And there's been some talks of possibly Levante David moving inside. So, I mean, if that's something the Bucs want to do is Quan walks, they move Levante inside. Now you can target edge. Either way, they need edge rushers. They can use an inside linebacker, just what kind of round you're looking for. I would like to see them go after a safety. I prefer Tyrann Mathieu, but if they can't get Tyrann Mathieu, then there's some in the draft, early in the draft, maybe in Nasir Adderley, if somehow by the grace of God he slips to the second round. Well, they can go and grab him.
There is a connection there between Tyrann Mathieu and Bruce Arians. So
a big one.
Plausible.
Yeah, and I did a free agent profile on a guy, Marcus Golden, coming out of Arizona again. I mean, I know teams really hate to see that, like when a guy comes from another team and starts pulling in all these free agents from his former team. But you know what? When that former team was 10-6 and a Super Bowl favorite, I'm okay with you pulling guys from that former team.
And then when they got blasted by the Panthers in the NFC Championship,
They definitely did.
Booyah! I'm fine with that as well. Sorry.
That's kind of where I see the Buccaneers sitting right now. It's going to be really interesting. I feel like, and there's no inside information behind what I'm about to say, but I feel like in the next 72 hours to a week, it's going to be very exciting. There's going to be some moves. I don't know if there's going to be like a ton of like huge signings, but I feel like the combination of players who might get released or traded versus players who might be coming in, it's going to be a very exciting next week or so for the Buccaneers.
What a tremendous discussion we have had tonight. Bonus edition of the C3 Panthers podcast. Thanks to David Harrison, who is our combine insider. I love to say that. Somebody who is tweet me. I'm telling you, you made my day, brother. You made my day when you messaged me. And tell our listeners how they can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, so again, at DH82_Bucs, I do have some Panthers followers from being on your show in the past. And like I said, I'm a football fan before anything else. And I'm more than happy to talk football with anybody at any time. However, I will warn you, the second you call me a name, we're just going to stop talking.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I would not think that Panther fans do that often. And if they did,
I've had some Falcons fans do it.
If they did, that was about Falcons. That's what I was going to say. It was about the Falcons. It was about Matt Ryan and how he's a cross-dresser. But other than that, I feel like we're all on the same page. David Harrison, Locked On Bucs podcast, as well as Bucs Nation writer. The C3 Combine Insider is what I say. You got to add to the bio. Cody, it was a blast, wasn't it?
Absolutely, man. I love talking about this stuff. I know David does too. Listen, man, the NFC South has some pretty bitter rivalries. I have no good feelings at all towards the Saints or the Falcons, but Tampa Bay, it's kind of hard to hate Tampa.
Which is strange. Isn't it strange? Because the strange part about this is the Saints have a ring. The Bucs have a ring.
Yeah, but
the Falcons and the Panthers don't have a ring.
Yeah.
But we all hate the Falcons the most.
Yeah, no.
That's the best part about this. The one thing about the NFC South is we all hate the Falcons the most.
That's it.